Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey, and I'm the Marketing Director here at Churn Zero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled, How to Scale Your Post-Sale Teams During Periods of Fast Growth. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording this session, and a link will be available 24 hours after this webinar. Throughout the presentation, you're welcome to submit your questions via the Questions tab, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion of this webinar. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenter today, Rod Cherkas. Rod is the founder of HelloCCO, which is a premier consulting firm that works alongside CEOs and their CS leaders at fast-growing SaaS companies to accelerate revenue growth, increase retention rates, expand product adoption, and delight customers. Rod has worked in executive roles at groundbreaking companies, including Intuit, Ringcentral, and Marketo, all of which makes him a perfect person for us to be talking today about scaling your CS teams. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Rod. Oh, Rod, it looks like you are
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. I am just super excited to be here. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, sorry. I think we're all good.
Hi, everybody. I am just super great. Thank you. I am, as I mentioned, I am just super excited to be here with you all today. I know it can be incredibly challenging to be a customer success leader at a fast-growing company that's going through periods of intense scale. You may find yourself in the spotlight very frequently because of the broad scope and the impact that you and your teams have on your business. And being in the spotlight can be potentially a good thing, or it might be a bad thing. It might be kind of new for you. And one of your fears might be that you're not actually doing enough to keep up with the growth of the business. And most of the time we are, but sometimes we miss important clues and signals that we really need to see in our business. So I want to start by sharing a story with you about a time where I got caught in the spotlight for the wrong reasons. And the experience was so difficult for me that I wasn't even sure I wanted to share it with you today, because I was afraid that you might think that I'm not credible. But I'm going to share this with you today because the fact that it happened makes me really credible. And it's one of the biggest learning opportunities that I've had in my career, and I want to make sure that I pass it along to you. And as a result of experiences like this, I also created a scaling framework that I'm going to share a little bit later in our discussion about how to help you be more successful in your role as you lead these organizations going through intense scale. So I started at Ringcentral a little over 10 years ago when it was selling internet-based phone systems primarily to relatively small businesses. I've been running the Postsale organization at Intuit's QuickBooks payroll team. And so running Postsale at Ringcentral was like a perfect job. It was right up my alley. And for the longest time, we were just killing it there. Our retention rates were improving, our implementation experiences were getting faster, we were putting out tons of self-service documentation to help with automation, and our quarter-over-quarter financial results were getting better, and it was awesome, and things were going so smoothly and so well. And that was what scaling was all about. The teams were growing. But as time went on, it became clear that I was missing important clues about some strategic changes that were happening at the company. As the company was starting to bring on these new and larger clients, what at the time were called like enterprise clients, and I didn't really know what that was. SMB had been my bread and butter. I knew how to improve, I knew what the customers needed, and I was really good at delivering those types of results. But I didn't know very much about this enterprise group, and it was kind of scary. But very soon, I ended up in the spotlight, and the glare really burned. And it became clear that me and my teams were not keeping up fast enough to support this growing enterprise business. And at some point, the executive team at Ringcentral made a decision to bring in somebody that had a lot more enterprise experience that could help make the company go faster. And that turned out not to be a good thing for me. And I got layered, and it hurt a lot. And you know what? It felt at the time like my career was going to end and that wasn't going to go well. And as you can tell that wasn't what's happened. I've had a very successful career, and it turned into a really good learning opportunity for me. So I've been a post-sale leader, like many of you, at companies including Intuit, Ringcentral, Marketo, and most recently Gainsight. And I have been under this glare many, many times. As a customer success leader, it's just a natural part of the job that you're probably going to be under the spotlight because of the importance of your role. And at these fast-growing companies, you need to figure out how to adjust. So you can be in the glare for the right reasons and the wrong reasons, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And I want to be able to help you as a customer success leader be able to understand what it's like to be in the spotlight and understand what it takes to scale an organization, and also to provide you with some tools to help you be able to scale and prioritize and make decisions at your fast-growing company. And I created a framework called the Post-Sale Scaling Framework, which we're going to go through as part of our discussion. Right? So raise your hand if you've seen Lady Gaga in concert, or maybe you've seen her perform on television. She loves being in the spotlight. And she also is incredible at thinking out about where she and her fans, sometimes called little monsters, are going. She is incredible about understanding trends about the future. And then she also does a ton of preparation and planning so that she can execute really well. A lot of skills that you need to be able to do as a customer success leader. And so she has earned the glory that she gets by being prepared and helping to make sure that she's ready for all the things in the future. And I've even heard that she practiced for 6 months in a row to get ready for one of her Oscar performances. So she's earned the ability to be in the spotlight. But this guy, I don't know, maybe you heard about what happened a couple of weeks ago, but this guy wasn't thinking about very far into the future, maybe not even 10 minutes. I mean, hadn't he been on Zoom and know that things could get recorded or people can record calls? But this is an example of ending up in the spotlight for not such a good reason. So what we're going to talk about today is, whether as you're scaling your organization and you're in the spotlight, whether it makes you feel like you're on the edge of glory and things are going great, or whether it makes you feel like you're at risk of being fired over Zoom, we're going to talk about some skills and resources to help you shine most positively during the organizational growth. So let me first talk about what scaling actually means, because a lot of the stories that I'm going to share with you today are related to the importance of thinking about where you're going in the long term, understanding the various steps on how you can get there, and then making sure that you are building the processes and resources in place to help you get there. Now, when I think about scaling, it generally means that the revenue of your company is growing faster than the resources or costs of your organization. So in order to scale an organization, you need to be thinking about how you can be doing things more efficiently, how you can be doing things more productively. And there's a couple of tips when you're thinking about scaling. One is recognizing that there's no such thing as scaled, right? You're never there. And that's one of the tough things about being a customer success leader is there's no destination. It's really a journey. And so you're leading your organization over this, sort of this adventure. The other thing to keep in mind is that as challenging as it is to run your day-to-day, it's also important that you keep a view on the horizon. Where is your organization going in the future? Are you listening for the signals? Are you participating in the strategy discussions? Are you involved with your cross-functional leaders to know how what you are doing is contributing to these long-term goals? And there's often collaboration, just like when you're climbing a mountain, you're going to work with all the folks that are, on this adventure with you. You need to be able to collaborate. And so scaling is often about, how well you can leverage and work with the other folks either on your team or across the company. And then also a key thing about scaling is you're frequently being asked to do more with less. You often have to find ways to be more productive. It often leads to ways that you can automate processes, take out manual steps, and sort of create the consistency in process so that you have more predictable outcomes and results. So, it's important for an organization to scale because it has a couple of key outcomes for key stakeholders across your company, right? One of them are your customers. And as an organization grows and it's becoming a lot more efficient, you're starting to get better customer outcomes because processes that were inconsistent are now repeatable and they know what to expect. You often find times that you're using systems and tools to make things more automated so that it's, there's more self-service rather than them being a little bit disjointed. So you tend to get better customer outcomes. You also see that there's more predictability in your business. That's great for customers. It's great for your managers. It's also great for your financial team because as a company is getting bigger and bigger, you need to have less variability in your financial outcomes. And so your organizations are going to appreciate that. You often find too that for your employees, their lives get easier. You get more productive, things get more efficient. Maybe your new hire onboarding process gets people productive more quickly. So you're thinking about ways to increase the output of your organization and to help improve your culture there. And then lastly, for your investors and other shareholders, many of which you may be shareholders in your own companies, is that it increases shareholder value because you're doing things, you have a better allocation of capital, you have a better, more efficient allocation of resources that you're definitely able to see better returns, which is good for everybody as well. So, what I want to have you think about too is, as you're going through this process of accelerated growth, this is an example of what, accelerated growth might look like at a company through its revenues. And sometimes you have this concept of sort of a hockey stick where something takes off. Well, you as a customer success or post-sale leader, even if you are doing continuous improvement, it may not be improving things fast enough to be able to take advantage of and keep up with the change of the company. That's one of the things that makes your job so challenging. It's this balance between short-term and long-term. And so what happens is you might have what you think is this continuously improving process, but your company's growth is growing and the needs of change are growing, that you end up having this scaling gap where this is where your organization should be. And even with continuous improvement, this is where your organization is. And so I want to help you think about how to improve that. When I work with my clients, to help them successfully scale their business, we're thinking about how do we keep up with the growth that's needed at the company and close the scaling gap. I know that you can do this, so let's talk about some ways that I can help you with that. So you end up in this spotlight, and you can get this done. So what I wanted to do is introduce you to a framework that I've put together based on my experience working with dozens of clients and interacting with hundreds of customer success leaders and post-sale leaders just like yourself. I developed this model to help my clients and to help you navigate this journey through this periods of growth. It's a tool that helps you make decisions. It's a tool that helps you stay aligned to the initiatives that are important to support this fast growth of the company. And it also helps you prioritize the inputs that are most important for your organization to stay aligned. Now, we're not going to be able to spend too much time on this. We have a relatively short amount of time, but what I do want to do is quickly highlight each of these different inputs and then go through a couple of examples of how you can actually apply this. So when you're thinking about the post-sale scaling framework, I've identified that there are 7 key inputs that you as a post-sale or customer success leader need to be thinking about in order to grow your organization. And one of them is structure, right? How is your organization structured today? And how does it need to be structured to support your organization in the future. When I'm doing all of this work with my clients, we're spending time and we're doing diagnostics and we're asking questions about how they're doing now in the future, but we're just going to summarize a little bit of this today. So in terms of structure, you may think about, do you have the right teams? Are you grouped by product? Are you grouped by geography? Are you grouped by customer segment? There's a lot of different ways, and over time, your organization may need to change to support the growing needs of your customer base. For example, maybe you have a growing enterprise segment. You need a special group that's specialized on that. The second area is understanding the input of customer value and how are the needs of your customers changing over time, right? Because the needs of your customers today may not be what your customers are going to need in the future. Maybe you have additional products that you need to support. Maybe you have different segments. Maybe there are different verticals, or maybe there's different experiences and outcomes that they need to be able to get value from your organization and from your products. So you need to be thinking about this customer value. The next area is alignment. And this is really important to understand what are the goals and expectations of your organization coming from your CEO and your CFO and your executive team, because that also changes over time, where the role of your organization, for example, at one point might be just get customers live or get them starting to use the product. As time goes on, you might need to improve productivity. You might have profitability metrics. Maybe you now are accountable for other revenue targets. And so understanding and asking about alignment is another key input to scaling an organization. Next, you want to take a look at leadership. Do you have the right leadership team in place? Do you have the managers that you need? Do the leaders have the resources and time that they need to grow the organization? And are you developing a bench of leaders that can help you be ready as your team grows, right? Like, what structure do you need? Do you have managers that are, maybe they used to be first line managers and now they're going to be managing others. So it's your leadership team needs to grow and scale over time. And so you need to be thinking about, is that a priority? Next is internal processes. And these are some of the capabilities that enable you to become more productive and efficient. So for example, a lot of times you need to put in place new systems so that your organization can have repeatability and predictability. Sometimes you need to gather data to help inform your decisions, and where are you getting that? And again, this is important because it's changing over time, and the types of decisions you need to make in the future may be different than what you have now. Next is network, and not every company this is as important, but a lot of companies are quite dependent on partners that they have, for example, to help do implementations or subcontracting. They may have certain vendors that provide them with resources that are mission critical, and sometimes they work with thought leaders that are helping, to provide best practices to their customers or to help them develop and grow their category. And so building out this network of, network is also a critical piece. And then lastly, you may want to think about your growth drivers. So how does your organization contribute to the revenue and profitability growth of the company? That's often a key success metric of the company. And so you want to better understand what are the expectations of your organization today and what are the expectations of your team moving forward, and are you ready for that? So those are the 7 areas. And as you start to then prioritize, so the idea is that you don't necessarily focus your organization on all 7 of those. You might want to identify, which 1 or 2 or 3 are most important for you to support the growth of your organization. And then you have a series of decisions that you need to make, right? And these, again, are constantly changing. And picture yourself on a curvy road, and even, at night, even with your headlights on, you can only see so far ahead, even if you have the brights. And this is kind of what it's like navigating through the decisions of scaling an organization, right? You have to make the best decisions that are right in front of you and try and anticipate where you're going. And sometimes you can do this yourself. I'd also encourage you to leverage your peers, A lot of companies bring in outside consultants to help them because they've seen some of these patterns before. That's a lot of times where I get asked to help with my clients that are going through the scaling process. And the important point is to bring in resources to help you anticipate the future and make the best decisions so that you don't end up in the spotlight for the wrong reasons. But let me give a couple of examples of the types of decisions that you may confront. So like one, for example, with segmentation is, how do you think about, maybe you have one team that is dealing with all of your customers, and then you start to say, hey, my organization needs a different experience for our smaller customers than our larger customers, because you could be sub-optimizing for all of them. So there's this concept around segmentation. Another example might be around the creation of just functional teams in your post-sale organization. Maybe there's one big group that's servicing all of your functions, and then you start to create, like for example, a lot of times CSM organizations do onboarding. And at some point you may want to split out the implementation and onboarding from your ongoing account management and create sort of an implementation or a services team. So are you anticipating the needs of the future? And another example might be, when do you want to buy and expand the use of your tools to help automate? So for example, one of my clients has been using Churn Zero for their CSM team, and they needed more process rigor around doing onboarding. And so they started using Churn Zero for their onboarding process, and that helped them be able to prepare for having more clients, more new prospects coming through their process. So the idea here is that you have a lot of decisions that you need to make. So you want to prioritize, and you want to make the best decisions that you can when the time comes up. Right? So when you think about this post-sale scaling framework, there are really 5 steps to implementing it. I'll go through really quickly. One is thinking about the future state of the organization. So this is understanding the strategy of the company, listening to where your organization is placing bets, because a lot of times one of the biggest challenges you face is you'll be placing a bunch of bets, but you're not sure whether it's going to work out. So understanding your future state and having a vision for where your organization is going. Second is to do an assessment. Again, when I work with my clients, we do a little bit more of a detailed assessment with strengths and gaps of some of these areas to come up with the small number of priorities. But you want to think about, what are your capabilities in each of these key areas so that you can focus on improvements that are going to have the most impact on your outcome, your desired outcomes. Next is prioritization, picking the small number of initiatives that will actually move the needle, because this is one of the biggest challenges that you have, is allocating your own time and the time from your leaders or your organization. And so, trying to figure out which ones will have the biggest impact on your outcomes is a key step in the process. Next, you need to make decisions. So this is sort of the fun point as a leader. A lot of times it can be a mindset of try things and fail fast and learn. But in any case, you want to be able to place your bets and then make sure that you are being clear about what you're doing to the various parts of your organization. And then lastly, thinking about execution, right? So ideally, it's a small number of initiatives that will have the biggest impact based on which of these 7 factors is most important to help support scaling of your business. And so this process together is one that I work on with my clients, and I hope that you can apply in your businesses and make it very practical. So let me go through an example of an actual scenario where a company was going through this, one of my clients was kind of going through this process. So this is a company that makes legal software, and they had just been killing it in their target segment, which sort of, as the company was growing, was the SMB, the small business and sort of mid-market. And they had a really actually quite optimized set of experiences for this target group of segments, and relatively, certainly a solid team, but not very differentiated in terms of functions around serving this. And so they were actually doing quite well in this segment. But what started to happen is that larger and larger clients wanted to be able to use their software. And then the product team started to develop features and capabilities that would be more appropriate for these larger clients. And that was some of the trends, and the existing leadership team and the post-sale teams were focused on this relatively, of this execution in the short term. And so one day, the Forrester Wave report came out, and it highlighted a deficiency, a specific deficiency in this organization's ability to deliver some particular post-sale experience for their enterprise clients. And this riled everybody up and kind of got focus on how do we make sure that we can service this need. And now it was sort of called out publicly, and it created a situation where the team hadn't been ready for this change, and people were going to get layered. And people are going to get brought in above them to help make sure they're driving change in this enterprise organization. And so I got brought in by one of these new leaders that came in to help address this particular opportunity in the market. And so we were able to prioritize that there were two areas of focus, sort of using this type of mindset. One was around customer value, and what were the needs of this growing enterprise segment, because this was going to become increasingly important to their business outcomes. And so when you think about those needs, you're thinking about the future outcomes. You're thinking about, is there a clearly defined customer experience that you have for this new segment? In this case, it was the enterprise. Is there a way that your organization is aligned to be able to deliver against those particular expectations that those clients have? And do you have processes in place to both execute it and also to be able to measure success? And as you do this more and more, you're also creating competitive differentiation, right? In this Forrester report, it was called out as a gap. But what soon happened afterwards, as we'll sort of talk about the results, is this gap turned into a competitive advantage. But there was a big focus on making this happen. So the second key priority was actually focusing on the network that they needed to create, because one of the key barriers was, as they brought on these new enterprise clients, that those enterprise clients needed much more handholding and guidance and best practices to help implement the solution across not just one business unit, but potentially across their whole companies. And so it became pretty inefficient and not sort of financially viable for the organization to build up their whole team, for example, a big professional services team internally. And so I helped this client put together a network, a third-party network of implementation consultants and other consulting industry partners to help them be able to grow. And so you're thinking about what are those future state outcomes, and then helping put in place those processes that provide you with third-party advocates, help you provide you with thought leaders, for example, and that inevitably create some barriers to competition that will differentiate you in the market. So this is actually quite easy to say, but it's not so easy to do. And let me just highlight a couple of the challenges that I helped my client work through as we were doing this, that you also may feel as you're going through your own process of scaling. Because there are inevitably, like a lot of times you have inertia about making changes to help do something that might not be exactly foreseeable. You might not know, is this actually going to turn out? So you might need to put in place new processes, but you may not have the team or resources that can help you do that. You may not be sure because you may not know what is successful for this new customer segment. Maybe it's not in your background, maybe it's not an expertise at the company, but how are you understanding what's important to them? You may need to develop, sort of the muscle on your team. Maybe it's people, maybe it's leadership to help you pull this together and deliver for these changes. And then one of the biggest challenges is that your teams, our teams, get so focused on the day-to-day crises and fires that we're going through that you're worried that if you take the eye off your eye off the ball to do things about something that has a long-term payoff, that you may have a risk to your short-term results. And this can be kind of challenging to get over, but acknowledging that these are concerns can be helpful. So with my client, we're actually able to help make some decisions and execute against a couple of different areas. One was creating a focus on this enterprise segment and helping to think through what those different sets of resources were and what they could be doing. Importantly, identifying these delivery partners that could help with this particular gap that was identified in the market to help them fill this need for competitive differentiation. And then we started putting together thoughts about what types of skills were needed in the future. Maybe people in the organization could expand their skill sets, but there might be others that they needed to bring in outside. And it doesn't mean that the people in the existing organization can't do their job, they just need to change it. And as you're hiring people anyway, you can be thinking about hiring people with a different or an evolving skill set. It can be kind of important to be able to do that. So I just wanted to highlight this, and the result was, like, one of the key things is, even within a relatively short time after we started collaborating, we were able to help close a deal that would just not have been possible without this sort of new focus and being able to collaborate, for example, with this network of consulting partners that demonstrated that it was possible. And within 1 quarter, they had a pipeline of 30 deals that they couldn't possibly have sold before. And that helped the company grow, helped the company scale. And I actually just saw this week that the company had raised another $150 million in revenue and tripled the valuation of the company. So an intense focus on scaling has great outcomes for lots of different stakeholders. So at this point, I'd like to turn it around to you and do a little bit of a poll about, do any of these areas resonate for you? So at this point, I'll ask Corey to help sort of answer the poll. Now, it only allows for 5 different selections, so I apologize for that. But the poll question would be, which areas do you think you'd like to most focus on in 2022 to help your organization scale? So if people can take a minute and enter your information.
Yeah, we're seeing results come in. I'll give a little bit more time for some more folks to respond, and then I will go ahead and share the results out. Give it one more second. Okay, let me go ahead and share the results. Do you see these, Rod, or should I cover the results?
I can see them.
Okay.
I can see them.
Yeah, so
Great.
I mean, it looked like the majority of folks are very focused on customer value, which is a good thing, being we're, CS focused there. And then internal processes is also another high ranking one. Anything else stand out to you here, Rod?
Yeah, no, I think these are really good ones, and we're going to be taking questions at the end. So if you have particular questions, please enter them into there's a section for entering questions. It's not the chat, but it's questions area about specific topics here. But I do think that it's kind of interesting around internal processes, and it's particularly being on the call with you, Corey, and around Churn Zero. What are the tools and resources that leaders like yourself need to be able to help feel confident about their ability to deliver for the future? Because it can be a real barrier that you feel like you instead of just having it be people related, you need things to help automate or make things repeatable or make systems and tools better able to access. I'm also curious about whether, in terms of internal processes, they're related to the data that you need to make decisions. So there's this growing focus on customer operations or customer success operations that are increasingly focused on this particular line around internal processes that leaders can sort of rely on to help with that. The other thing that I think is an interesting call out was around the customer value and how the needs of customers change over time, and whether people feel like, whether the leaders here on the call feel like they understand enough about how the customer needs are changing, and are they having enough interactions with their clients directly to be able to understand that and then interpret it for their organizations. So thanks for that. I have another, see if I can, I have another poll that I'd like to potentially have people do. And this is less of a poll and just more of, I'd like people to be thinking about how you can apply this framework in your business, right? So the takeaway from the poll was, okay, there's 7 areas, but maybe, 1 or 2 or 3 of them are most important for you. So of those areas that maybe you just identified in the poll, make a list for yourself of like, what are the decisions that you think you might need to make to help you, contribute to the growth and scale of your organization, right? So like, take a minute, write that down. Like, this isn't just a sort of a presentation. I believe that this can be a framework to help you actually make decisions for your organization. So think about some of the things that are out there, and also, as you're considering these decisions that you need to make, also think about, what are some of the areas that might be holding you back from making these decisions, right? Think about, are there organizational barriers? Is there fear of failure? Is there, are there resource constraints that you have? This balance of short and long, and how can you overcome these, right? This is a lot of the value that I provide with clients, as we'll talk about. Please reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn. There's also lots of ways to work with your peers to help you prioritize that, because the idea is that you want to make sure that you end up in the spotlight for the right reasons. So
I just went ahead and launched the
yeah,
poll
so
for this.
oh yeah, let's do that. So there's another poll, which is, what barriers, if any, are holding you back from driving these changes to help you scale? So let's just take a minute.
I'm seeing responses come in. Give it just another second before I close the poll and share the results. Okay. So lack of resources is one of the #1 barriers, but also not very surprising. But
yeah, lack of resources and too many other priorities, which actually go kind of hand in hand, because part of what makes your job such a monster job and so challenging is because you have to actually think about these 7 input areas. And not only about those 7 areas, you have to think about them in the short term and also in the long term, right? How are you delivering in your current, month or quarter? And then, are you going to be ready for this stuff in the future? And so that's where the leadership of being able to figure out what are the priorities that you have, right? And why aren't you able to get around to these things that need to get done? And again, that's a lot of the times when I get pulled in to work with a client, it's because they know they need to do these initiatives, but they don't have resources in their organization to do it. And I just want to assure you, because I know that this is hard for folks, particularly like as you're growing in your career. You want to be the hero. You don't want to be able to tell your boss that you don't know everything and can't figure it out. But I can tell you, the most successful leaders recognize when they can get help. And it is not show poorly of you to say, hey, I need expertise. I need to bring in someone that can help me do this. That's kind of why you hire people, and hiring really good people. But even if you need to bring in a consultant or an expert in a particular area of business, that is a leadership trait that you'll develop over time, is having the confidence that that is a good thing, versus bringing in outsiders or even people that know more about you to work for you, that somehow demonstrates a deficiency in some area. I think that's an important skill and something I try and help my clients get over. And I can already, I see that a lot. So let me go back, before we're going to stop in just a minute and take questions. But let me flash back to the discussion that we had about my experience at Ringcentral, which I thought was going to be a career ender, but it wasn't. So after leaving Ringcentral, I ended up joining Marketo, and I was there for almost 5 years. I was there to help the company grow and scale from when it was $60 million in revenue to over $300 million in revenue. I was there for 2 exits, an IPO and also another acquisition. And that was great. And it was a ton of fun to do that. But most importantly, when I joined Marketo, I was there getting hired to replace somebody who had already been there. And this person that now worked for me was getting layered. And I had so much more empathy for this team member about how he was feeling. And I also, spent a lot of time trying to make sure that he felt like his growth was really valued. And he ended up staying with us for years. But it made me a much more empathetic leader, having gone through it. And also, it made me a lot more aware to pay attention to the signals, to listen to what was happening in the long term, and be aware that as a leader, I needed to do a better balance of delivering in the short term for delivering in the long term. And that's a lot of what I love doing with my clients today, being able to help them bring in specialists, either myself or others. And so the takeaway was what had felt like a career setback turned into a really great learning opportunity and helped propel me. Okay. So, as as we turn to questions in a couple of minutes, I just want to share a couple of things. One is you are going to be in the spotlight. This is a big job, and it's really important to contribute, that people are expecting you to contribute to your company growth. And so you should expect to be in the spotlight, and think about ways that you and your teams can be in the spotlight as in a positive way as much as possible, and then being able to handle it when things don't go so well. Second takeaway is that scaling is really hard. And so, be thinking about things you can be doing to help plan, to work with your peers on best practices, to bring in outsiders to be able to help, whether it's me, others, and also rely on others in your organization. And then lastly, that there are some tools available to help you think structurally about how to make sure you're growing and scaling your organization, like the post-sale scaling framework that I've helped think through and help you learn about today. So I know that you want to do a great job, and I know that you want your customers to be successful and to have a great customer experience. And I know you want your companies to be successful. And so I want you to walk away feeling confident and positive that you can help scale your company and scale your career. And you can do this by anticipating the future, helping to prioritize, and helping your team to be ready for supporting the growth of your company. So I appreciate the time you've spent. Thank you for that. And I'd really love if you could connect with me on LinkedIn. So reach out, just connect. If you have any questions, you can find me on email. You can learn more about the methodology and get in touch with me through my website at HelloCCO.com. And I just encourage you to enjoy the journey, enjoy being in the spotlight. It is a challenging job, but we're all here to support each other and help grow what is still an incredibly young function. And I love working with this group, and I wish you the best. So let me turn to some questions,
Yeah.
and we can then just have some dialogue.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rod, for that presentation. I know I took away lots of valuable things, and we do have questions that already came in. So I'm excited to jump into those. But as Rod said, please do go ahead and submit your questions, and we will get to them. So our first question says, we have a brand new customer success department, one person at this time. Talk about some best practices that we should focus on during the early days of this department.
Yeah, so when we go back to even sort of the approach, you want to understand what is the goal, like what are the outcomes and expectations for your customer success department. So I would have a discussion with your manager to help understand what are the outcomes that you want. Is it thinking about getting your customers onboarded and started? Is it thinking about expansion and growing? It could also just be learning about your customers. And the most important thing that this new one-person team is doing is just providing a funnel of information back into the organization. So I wouldn't broaden your scope so much, but really try to understand what in your early days you can do to add as much leverage to your organization as possible.
I like that. Um, let's see. Our next question says, um, what are your suggestions and best practices for managing up and selling ourselves internally upwards?
Yeah, that's a really great question to think about. And the dialogue that you can be having is to, to also be direct, right? Like understand what role your customer success organization, and I don't know in this case if you're talking about like a CSM organization or whether the person asking the question is responsible for all of the post-sale teams, but you want to understand like what the role and the desired outcomes are, and then think about how you can be measuring those results. So it relates to this metric around key success factors and success metrics. There may be certain success metrics in terms of customer outcomes. There may be certain success metrics in terms of financial outcomes. So obviously there's no one answer of how to explain the value of your organization, but understanding what role it plays, trying to identify ways to capture that value and measure it, and then importantly, being able to communicate those results back to your organization in a regular way.
Excellent. I like those tips there. Um, so let's see. Our next question is, what are core success metrics that you find yourself coming back to no matter what company you're at?
Yeah. So I would say that there are some common trends around metrics that a customer success organization's focused on. One of them is around, and again, I don't know whether it's a all post sale or whether you're thinking about the CSM, but one is around time to adoption. So when you bring in new clients, how quickly can you get them using your product in some material and sticky way? Second is around retention rates, and this can be measured. Different companies and find different focuses, but it can be net retention or gross retention, which is a focus on like, are you just keeping the logo in general? And then there could be a focus on expansion. And depending on the roles and responsibilities at your company, your customer success or post-sale teams may be fully responsible for some of these, partially responsible, or they may work with other organizations like sales on expansion. So I would say those. And then there are some a little bit harder to measure the attribution, but some type of customer satisfaction or net promoter score is another one. But that can often be an input metric to whether you're driving retention and growth within your organization. So I would focus on a couple of those. But obviously, if
Excellent.
there's more you want to follow up, like please reach out to me directly and I can be more specific about your situation.
Yeah, certainly. So our next question kind of speaks to something that you brought up about scaling and specializing roles. And this question says, recommendation for the size of a customer success team before hiring a customer success ops role.
Yeah, this is an evolving
Hmm.
capability in an organization, and I'll go back to the it depends. I don't know that there's a particular size that matters. I think more about the expertise in an organization. So you as a customer success leader may have a broad range of responsibilities depending on the size of your team. Like in a smaller organization, maybe you just have a team of direct reports. In a larger organization, you may have a team of managers or a team of directors. And so at some point, you might be thinking about more around the responsibilities. When you start to get to a place where maybe your process improvement becomes a barrier to your growth, or the ability to implement successfully systems across and maintain those across your organization, like putting in place churn zero, to be able to work with your post-sale organizations. Or maybe there are some data needs where reporting becomes a barrier. A lot of what happens is that you sort of start at a company where you rely on other groups, like maybe you're relying on your revenue ops, your sales ops, or maybe there's a data analytics team. And you get to a point where you're not getting their attention enough and you need focus. And so that can be a good time to bring in a customer operations or customer success operations. And I think it's more of a decision of, do you need a team or do you need a particular person? And so again, it's more of you when you start to have those needs and you're not able to get the needs delivered from other parts of your company, then it might be a good time to hire a skill set. But I think that's an increasingly important and valuable role.
Yeah, I agree. We see the same thing with our customers. Another question that we have is, how do you determine the number of accounts that a CSM can manage successfully? I guess, do we have to see if it breaks at some point, or is there a way to determine that ahead of time?
Yeah, again, I'd be happy to go offline about the specifics around your situation to help see. But I think what you're looking at is, how do you decide when you split up a particular group into multiple people, and what is the right size? You can think about the roles and responsibilities on the team. So some inputs to that might be, are you responsible for onboarding if you're at the CSM? Are you responsible for the actual contractual retention? Are you responsible for expansion? And also, how frequently does that happen? So for example, companies that have very, very high retention rates, there might not be a lot of work that the CSM needs to do on a renewal contract, where if your retention rates are very low, there might need to be a lot of interaction on a high percentage of your deals. So there's no, one answer to that, but there are some, like some generalizations about size. I think I've seen data between 2 million and 4 million in terms of portfolio value, but it obviously depends on your product and your segment and the characteristics. But please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have specific questions and want to go into more detail.
Sounds good. Thanks for that advice. We have another question that says, for a customer success leader that is going to lead scaling for the team, what are some key skills or characteristics that should be adding to?
Yeah, I think one of the skills is being able to balance short-term priorities and long-term initiatives. So this ability to juggle multiple things and sort of change your perspective, I think, is important. Second is being able to work cross-functionally, because my belief is that your understanding of what's happening in the future is going to come out of other organizations. Like, what is your sales team starting to see in the market? What is your product team starting to work on? What is your finance organization thinking about where the company needs to be in the future? So I would develop a couple of those key cross-functional relationships. And then third skill is your ability to drive change in the organization that is just sort of continuous. There's, like I mentioned, there's no destination, it's just a journey. And so being able to hire people that have a continuous improvement and always, getting better mindset, and to be able to, to drive change in your organization in a way that helps maintain your company culture and helps you get those outcomes. So I would focus on those three areas.
Awesome. We have a question that says, if we do not have a customer success leader on the C-suite, how do we advocate for that transparency so we can know the future state to help us make better decisions to scale our team?
Yeah, in organizations like that, you can be developing as a customer-facing leader independent relationships with other functional organizations, right? It's possible that you work at a company that peers will only talk with each other, but there's no reason that even if you don't have representation at the, sort of at the C-level or on the executive staff, that you can't be building independent relationships with your head of sales or your regional leaders of sales, or with your head of product, or with your heads of finance, to understand what needs to happen and to get input on that. So I don't think that that's a barrier. Ideally, you would understand the role that your team needs to play. And so whoever you're reporting up to can be your advocate, and that you have a mutual understanding of what's needed and what you need to deliver for that person to be successful. But I would think about building out those independent relationships and also making sure that your leader who is representing you can represent your interests, and then identify what you need from those peers if you're not able to drive those changes or get that input directly.
Thank you. That's some good advice there. Let's see, maybe our last question. And let's see, it says, the framework is extremely useful. Thank you. I know this is a very complex question, but how would you approach some internal stakeholders who are resistant to changes during a scaling phase?
Yeah, so I think there might be a difference between internal stakeholders that are peer leaders, and there could also be internal stakeholders that are in your organization. So I don't know exactly what you're referring to. I'm going to highlight that your peers, your peer leaders, whether it's in your post-sale organization more broadly, or whether they could be other cross-functional peers in other teams, are key drivers of change. And so I've found a couple of techniques to do that. One is to meet regularly with key influencers in other functional teams and make sure that both of you understand each other's objectives. So for example, if you're meeting with a sales leader, that sales leader understands what's important to you, what your measures of success are, and the types of initiatives that you have in place to help deliver those. And then also ask the same of those leaders so that you understand what's important to them, and then you can build out a mutually beneficial relationship with them. And I think if you selectively find those leaders, even the ones that may be resistant to change, and you help them understand what you're trying to do in your organization, right? These small number of priorities, and be clear about how their organizations might contribute, like what do you need from them, that you're going to start to build those relationships. And I know that that is really hard in a time where we are not in the same like physical spaces. Maybe we haven't had an offsite in a long time and we're trying to do this on Zoom. So I think that building those relationships helps with the mutual trust and understanding. And so find at least a small number of folks to invest that type of time in, so that you can be working together and help overcome those potential barriers or that change resistance.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of trying to make those connection points with your peers, as you said. So at this time, we will go ahead and close out the questions. And thank you so much, Rod, for all of your advice and walking us through your framework. I know it's been really valuable to me, and so I hope it's been valuable to others. I want to remind everyone that we are recording this session, and we'll be sending that out via an email tomorrow afternoon. At the end of this webcast, you'll see a survey pop up, and we'd appreciate if you could just take a minute before logging off just to complete that survey to provide your feedback to us, so we can continue to build out our webinar programming and bring you content and things that you would like to see. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. And thanks again, Rod.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.